Afternoon, Brandon. It's a frigid afternoon here in Dunroven. What is it like over there in Reigate?
Frigider. How's that? No, I don't know how cold you were. We had 11 below this morning, and it's warmed up to about 8 above right now. And it's
Yeah.
what, 1 o'clock. So it's not horrible, but it's just Montana.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what our temperature is reading right now is 8 above. But I'll bet you that you have a little more breeze over on that side than we do here.
This morning it has been calm. It's nice.
Ah,
So, but as it warms up, you can always tell when the temperature comes up in the wintertime, you're going to get wind with it.
yeah. Well, we had the wind last night, so we're blowing it over your way. So do expect it tonight. Okay.
Okay, we'll look for it.
Yeah, it took our power off.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this evening, last evening. So James had his work cut out for him this morning, getting everything back up and rolling. So, Brandon, I hear that you have another ranch repair operation to share with us today, right?
Well, that's kind of an everyday thing, it seems like. But yeah, this was a problem that was kind of chronic, and tried to get a fix on it, and it didn't necessarily work. I will explain it in the video, but yeah, it's just a repair that something kind of dawned on me, just a little problem solving, and I went, oh, hey, I wonder if, and only because we'd done a repair and it didn't work.
Ah, yeah. And isn't that the way things go? You know, that's how science moves forward, is through experimenting. And what I often tell people is the mistakes are every bit as valuable as the successes.
Sometimes more valuable, because if you just do something and you're successful at it, you tend to forget about how you got there.
Yeah.
When you have mistakes or something doesn't go right, it's a lot easier to go, oh, I remember that. It hurt a little bit more, so you tend to remember. It's a little more of an emotional learning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, psychologists would back you up, and they would say that it takes, like 6 good memories to erase 1 bad. I mean, so and by bad, I mean a failure or an embarrassment or whatever, something that had that emotional impact on you that really sticks with you.
Can I lay down on a couch now so we can talk about all my past non-successes?
Oh, that's great. All right. Well, I'm
Dr. Suzanne is at it now.
Oh, absolutely. But I always thought that was really interesting. It took so many good experiences in the same sort of arena to counterbalance the ones that don't go so well.
Well, and you've been into some of my clinics, and we talk about that very thing about emotional learning and repetitive learning. So yeah, no, it works with animals. It works with us. It's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask James to let the video roll then, so I can learn exactly what you did and where you started. So,
okay.
James, let it roll.
Hello from the Hashknife. Well, if I'm not working on one end of this outfit, I'm working on the other. And actually, I'm going to try to solve a problem today that I've had for a while, and that is this thing's running really rough, and the check engine light comes on sometimes it clears itself, so it's kind of intermittent. You can't really necessarily tell what the problem is, and it seems to be running, really rich. I can smell fuel, so it's kind of due for a tune-up anyway, or was. I took it into a friend of ours who has a shop, and he went through some things, and kind of as luck would have it, he found that the whole top of the rear fuel tank, because there's 2 tanks on this thing, front and rear, the whole top of the rear tank was rusted through enough that when he started messing around with lines and wires, it collapsed and fell into the tank. It was just completely rusted through. So he changed the tank, and it actually ran better when the fuel was selected on that rear tank. Engine light was clear. We kind of did a tune-up at the same time while it was at it. And then, as I started driving it home, started running rough again. Well, we needed the pickup, had to have it, couldn't do without it. So I've kind of let it go for a little while. And now that we're feeding cows again, I really can't be without it. So I'm sitting here racking my brain. What could it be? Why would it run rougher on a tank that we changed out brand new? And then it finally occurred to me, this isn't really about a tune-up problem at all. I'll bet you we have had a failure in the fuel pressure regulator, which is on the fuel coming into on top of the engine, on top of all of the cylinders. So I got to thinking about problem solving. New tank, new fuel pump with that tank, and I'll bet it is putting out more pressure than the old one was, which was putting out less pressure than the front tank, if you can follow me there. So I've got more pressure coming in, and the fuel regulator pressure regulator has failed, and it's continuing to get worse and worse. And then with this better fuel pump in the rear tank, it's just making it worse. So I called local parts store, and they had this in stock, and it's about 90 bucks. $90. So what I'm going to do is swap these out, because here's where I'm looking, is I can drive this to town, be without it for several days, and really create a hardship for ourselves, or I can take a part that I pretty well think we've reasoned out that this is the problem. And I actually went on FaceTube, or YouFace, or actually YouTube. You'd be surprised what you can learn on that thing. And I always mistakenly thought, you know, most of the time that a fuel pressure regulator would fail to where you'd have no pressure and it would be hard to start and it wouldn't start. Well, this is the opposite problem. And I think, you know, it can go either way. So we're going to give this a shot, see what happens. So stick with me. Well, here's under the hood. And there's our part down there, that cylindrical thing with the black hose sticking out the top. It's a vacuum hose, and it's just got a couple of hex type Allen screws in there that holds it in. And I'm not one to change parts out for the sake of changing parts out, but in this case I think we've pretty well nailed it and eliminated most everything else. But for the time that it would take to have this out of commission, and the expense alone in fuel to drive it down and back, kind of warrants doing this, and it's probably just not a bad idea. So we'll swap it out. When I pull this thing out, we'll kind of explain and show how it works. Okay, some of my tools around, and this is always fun laying on your stomach, but that's what it is. And I've looked at this, and I just don't think we can get this thing down in there. We're going to replace it and keep it nice and clean. That's one of the important parts on this too. I've got another hose that comes off of this guy on the bottom here. Let's take it apart. And doing some of this stuff, you get something a little more complicated, always a good idea. And anymore, it's different. When I was a kid, I got my butt chewed for not tearing into something when I could have. That's come off nice. Nice and easy. Almost too easy. Because I had went back to the ranch and not tore apart on a swather a piece of rod, or well, it was an arm that went through a bearing that had failed. And I was only about 12 years old. I got my butt chewed for not trying that, and I was afraid to tear it apart because I didn't want to not remember how to do it. And my dad gave me a good lesson on, you will scratch it in the hood of the pickup in the dirt, make a picture somehow. That I'd like to get that off of here without removing this, but this has got to go. So that was a good lesson. And now with cameras on everybody's phone, God, that makes it so easy to be able to see something even ahead of time and see what you got to do when something's in a tight spot. Kind of make a plan of attack, and then also to feel that. Ooh, there we go. Feel that up. Hey, look at that. That gets us a little closer. Okay, now pull the coil wire off of this, lay it back, and pull our vacuum, making sure that it's all okay, and inspecting it. Make sure there's no holes in it. That would be the only other thing that would be a problem. And usually if it's like that, you're not going to see any great performance out of it. It's got to run on the vacuum of the engine. All right. So let's see. About the right size. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. There's one. Sit there right there so it doesn't go anywhere. Alright. And I'm gonna have to grab a bunch of rags just in case something spills out here. It shouldn't, because this engine is cold. This first thing, I wanted to make sure that we change this out, because if the minute you turn the key on, it's going to pressure up the whole fuel system and it can spray fuel out of here. So I'm doing this cold before it ever starts in order to avoid that, but I still want to make sure I can get some fuel prevention. Nothing worse than dropping that down on this engine and starting it up. You know how that goes. Okay. Under here. Got a last screw out. Let's see. I can gently move this. Get up. There we go. Boy, that's easy. That's pretty clean. So, fuel comes up into here and regulates the pressure on a plunger in there, and a bypass allows that fuel to come back out here and drain back to your tank. And so we have failed somewhere in there. And, tiny little booger. Good. All right. So I'm gonna grab my part. Alright. This has got a little bit of lubricant on those O-rings. So that'll be good to push in here. Set that down in. Even. Alright, it's kind of seated. Well, that's just too darn easy. Liking that. Liking that. Okay, start a couple of screws here, back in. Then by hand, that's pretty easy. One started. Hardly any fuel come out of that at all. So that being depression really helped a bunch. Okay, my other screw. Started. All right. Now, here's where I go. There we go. I'm not gonna tighten that completely. I'm gonna get it started. And then we'll tighten them up so it comes down even on each side, so that we're pushing that cylinder with the O-ring down in there nice and straight. And then we'll go ahead and get a little snug. Boy, this is just too easy. All right, look at that. You can see that. Very nice and shiny. It's kind of hard to see with this. There we go. There's the new one. Back in there. And we'll just hook everything back up. Put that vacuum back on. And seat that hose nice. Boy, that was easy. way easy. That was nice and clean down in there too, so that helps. Pulling that off. All right, put everything back together. Put our coil wire back on. Don't want to forget about that or we'll never get that started. Wonder how that happened. Good, okay. All right, now to put our intake back on. I was able to get a little more legs on this tripod for you. Dang it, should have done that before. Anyhow, so I'm gonna put this back in place and I'm gonna go back exactly like it came off. Hopefully, without too much complication. Get started. There we go. And our air filter sits right inside this box. There. Any dust accumulation should, there we go, take care of that upstream but not downstream, so we kind of want to make sure we're nice and clean. Appears that we are. I'll hook my bottom hose up. Everything looking good. These two in place. There's one. Started, there we go. Pop, pop. Alright, now. Man, this is nice. About as easy as I could hope for. This metal's cold on this engine. It's about 35 degrees or so, which isn't horrible, but it was sitting out all night waiting for me to do this. So my prep work started yesterday afternoon, early evening, to set this here and let it make sure that that fuel line or fuel lines all depressured, and that worked out well. That's got to go in just a little further. So that's a good safety thing there, making sure that that fuel didn't spray, and it hardly even dripped out of there. See if I can get much out of this before we start this up. I'll explain how this works. A little bit more. Okay. I need to go super tight there. There. That one's good. Double check. That one's good. Ow. And then these guys. Boy, let's hope this works. I'll be thrilled if it does. We will know it immediately. I wish I could have started this pickup for you ahead of time, but I didn't think about yesterday starting it and having it run to show you the difference. So you're just gonna take my word about how rough it was running. I wouldn't be changing these parts out if it was all for naught. We'll see here. Let's grab our old part. These O-rings. Whoop. O-rings. So the vacuum, as you rev your engine up, it pulls a higher vacuum, which lifts up this little plunger in here and allows only so much in. It regulates that pressure that's set with this little ingenious idea. I'm just going to stick it back in the old box. Yeah, there's some fuel in there. Not much, I'll be darned. I thought that would run out of there a little better. Anyway, okay. Let's pull my tools out of the way. And we'll go over and start this. Alright, so I'll show you this fuel selector in here. You can see the filler caps for the front and rear tanks. So we changed that rear tank out. Here's our selector switch, which is good to be able to determine which is fuel tank we're on, and if they don't fail, both of them. And we'll see if this thing starts. Whoa! Boy, that already runs nicer. Goes to an idle. Let's swap tanks. Now it should go really, just almost quit. Cross your fingers. It's reading the fuel tank. A little low on that end, that's all right. Boy, that hasn't at all changed idle speed. nice. Nice, nice, nice. Go back to the better tank. It's indicating on that tank, at least the float is. I am liking this. No change. I think we have solved the problem. Oh, that'll be nice, because this thing was sucking fuel as well. You can imagine it's burning fuel out the tailpipe and some carbon, so I'm going to have to run this up the road a little bit just to make sure I get it up to speed and kind of clear off some of these spark plugs in the cylinders with some of the carbon buildup with that fuel that's sprayed too heavily in there. All right, this is good. All in all, I think we have ourselves a success story. Thanks for coming along.
Brandon, you know, I don't think people who don't use trucks on a daily basis understand all the various aspects of owning and using a truck that is out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm going to relate this to my buying a truck, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, you know, when I bought my first diesel truck about 15 years ago, and I don't give a hoot about cars, but I sure give a hoot about trucks. And so I did a lot of research, and I came up with a lot of the compromises that you have to have when you want that truck to be doing so many different things. Yeah, and I can just see you nodding there, understanding that, like the dual tanks, okay? And you have the wheelbase. So whether you have a cab and a half or two cab, you know, and then you have the turning radius on the wheelbase, which means where you can or cannot turn around a trailer. There's all of these little things that you really have to take into account when you are getting a truck. And when you get the right truck, you're not letting somebody take it away from you, and certainly not some small deal like a fuel pump issue. It just reminded me that you've got a lot of yourself in that truck, and you and it are a working team.
Well, one of you will work if the other one doesn't. So, and it's usually not the truck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the dual fuel tanks, that's something that, again, most people who don't use trucks in a working capacity don't even think about having, you know, much less having to deal with the fuel pump that is differentiating between those two tanks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because on that one, or there's been some of these models, the fuel, it isn't like the old days when the fuel pump was on the side of the engine block and it just drew fuel from whatever source was there. These modern ones now, and this is a 1994 model, so it's considered modern by those standards, but it's got two fuel pumps, one in each tank.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to talk to you about the modern aspect. A couple things are really hit me when you were during the video. One of them was the use of YouTube and cell phones.
Right.
It can be very beneficial because people who do have this kind of equipment, there are forums and all kinds of places out there where people keep older equipment really running and going and swap ideas. Is that not correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. You run it as long as you can.
Yeah, exactly. And then the cell phone of taking a photo so that when you take something apart, you don't have leftover pieces.
Right. or whatever you're replacing isn't turned around backwards, or, you know, because that can happen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, if you are forced to confront a piece of complicated equipment and you've not done it before, you have to dive in and learn. But I do remember numbering parts and having a butcher paper out there where you would put the parts and you would label them. And I mean, it was quite an ordeal because it's just all too easy to get confused once you get focused on one part and then you have to put the whole thing back together again.
That's right. Well, and when my dad would buy a vehicle, even if a used one, he would get a parts manual with it. And so that a lot of times has schematics drawn in there and the procedures, how many inch pounds or foot pounds of torque you needed to put on a bolt or a nut, and super, super handy tool to have. But normally those are at home in the shop and you're broke down somewhere. It doesn't help you diagnose a problem necessarily, but it sure does help you in once it's apart, getting it back together.
Well, I have another story along that line, Brandon. I bought a brand new truck in Seattle when we were living in Alaska. And I called my father-in-law, who is a physicist. In fact, he was instrumental in developing radar, during the Second World War. A brilliant man, When I flew down to Seattle, I knew enough because I had lived in Alaska long enough that I said, I'm not driving off the lot without the mechanic's manuals,
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking a small deal here. We're talking multiple books.
Right.
Looks like the Sears catalog,
Yep.
in fact. I mean, multiple, box full of books. And these guys didn't want to part with them. And I said, well, you can go easy, you can go hard, because I'm not driving out of the parking lot until I have these. I'm headed up the Alcan Highway as we speak, Brand new car. And you know what? Brand new cars always have issues. They always do. Anyway, so I pick up my father-in-law, and indeed, we're traveling the Casier Highway, which is on the coastal part of British Columbia. And I'm going up a hill, and the clutch just free flowing. I mean, boom, the clutch was out, done. Pouring down rain. And I slide back down this hill. We haven't seen a car for hours. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. So here's my PhD physicist father-in-law and me diving into the manual for the car, for the brand new Ford F-250 four-wheel drive pickup. Right. And the worst part was figuring out the serial numbers for everything, because it was a dichotomous key. It was a if then this, it was well organized, very good, but boy, you really had to know where you were in this huge big pile of stuff. Anyway, it took us about 3 hours to figure out the manuals and to get through all of that stuff. But once we figured it out, it was the clutch plate that was a problem, and we actually fixed it within an hour of figuring out all of the manual, and I was so grateful. Not once during that whole time did a car go by. I mean, we were
Figures.
No, I mean, this was out in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia, and I always drove big trips in Alaska with the manuals just because of that particular incident. And again, people who haven't gotten themselves, and you can do that. You can do this in central Montana where you're off on a road and you're not going to see anybody, and you've got to get out there and fix it yourself. You're just not going to, there's no other resource.
That's right. If you don't, the other alternative is you leave it and you got to come back and fix it anyway.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. So the cell phone, let me ask you about the new trucks, the electronics, that are kind of creeping into everything. Do you have a newer vehicle that this has become an issue with you?
Yeah, there's been, I've got a couple of, I got a car. It's 2015, so it's, to us it's new, and then a 4Runner that's 2017, and I can change oil. I can do some very light stuff on them, but there's a lot of things I cannot do. I don't have the diagnostic tools to do it, because it's all about you can plug in a little gizmo and it'll tell you what the code is, but then you got to know what the code reader means and go from there to work on it. And there's a lot of things I just flat can't do anymore. Most of us can't. It's some of that's by design. Say there's been some recent litigation with John Deere Corporation.
Yeah.
And some of their software where you may know what's going on because you can get the code, but you can't work on it. And once you do work on it, you can't reset it because you don't have the software to be able to reset. And they hold on to that, and they absolutely they have you over a barrel so badly that it literally takes thousands of dollars to be able to clear some codes, update their software, and then you can keep going. And you can't even bypass a like a safety switch of some sort that really doesn't have anything to do with any safety issues. It's just a code comes up. You should be able to bypass that, and it won't let you do that. So these are all by design. Automobile manufacturers, tractor manufacturers, they are making you dependent on them at their base rate at which they set the price at. And if you don't like it, tough.
I've been wondering about this whole, integration of electronics and all of these kinds of things, because if you think it's bad, I mean, first of all, most things are meant for an urban environment where you have these things accessible. That's right. The first thing. And so when you get into a place like Alaska or Eastern Montana, where these things just aren't accessible, I mean, you've really created a whole different level of problem for the people trying to utilize that. And then when you go over to a foreign country, I mean, I don't know if you've ever traveled in some of these places, but I mean, there are 1950 vehicles driving around because they can keep them together. Right. I mean, they can do it. And I just, I think parts of the technology are just wonderful, but it seems to me that that the complexity and the integration of electronics into some things is not really that beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, when it's good, it's really, really good, and when it's bad, it's horrid. It's like the little girl with a curl in the middle of her forehead.
Yeah.
When it works great, hey, it's fantastic, and you don't even think about it. But when it's not, then you're sunk. You might as well be walking.
Yeah. Yeah. What a trade-off, huh?
Yeah. I do kind of like the older days when, a little bit of knowledge, you can figure some things out and you can problem solve. And if you have to improvise, you can do that. And that's not always the case anymore.
Yeah. And we're really getting away from that. And I think the implications for people who live in the circumstances like you do are really much more profound than they are in the rest of us. Yeah.
You sure see it quicker. And you're right about the urban versus rural areas. If you're in an urban area, the worst thing that can happen is you can have a garage or someone tow your vehicle to some place, and then they can just slowly separate you from your money.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Brandon, as always, you raise issues that I really find intriguing because it's, your life is so much more dependent on your own ability to do what you need to do than the rest of us. And it really points out these, issues.
Well, self-sufficiency makes survival a little bit easier in some cases, and this isn't much of a Shakespearean multi-scene play today, but it sure was low budget, so we weren't moving a lot around. It wasn't taking a lot of time. I thought maybe this is something that people would be interested in, and it wasn't real sexy and it wasn't real dramatic, but it's just normal. That's kind of some of the things you do. And we got lucky. I mean, the reasoning worked out. And one of the things that come out of this is that when I parked that pickup and like this morning was 11 below and I had it plugged in, I always I shut the pickup down with the fuel selector on the rear tank. And the reason is that pump is stronger in that tank. So I've got a little bit more fuel boost when I go to start on a cold morning. So I got a little more fuel there. So something else come out of that I can use. Yeah.
Well, that's really knowing your equipment.
Or getting to learn it. Yeah. That's
exactly. Well,
I just as soon not be that intimate with my the engines on my vehicles, but it is what it is.
But there again, you just mentioned something that a lot of people probably don't even know about, and that's head bolt heaters. Which the parking meters in Fairbanks, Alaska, have head bolt outlets where you could park plug your car in while you go shopping.
You've said that. It makes perfect sense,
Yeah. It's very useful for sure, particularly on a diesel. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Brendan, I love talking with you. It really takes me down memory lane, even though I'm not dealing with a lot of these issues right now. It it really reminds me of some of my own personal experiences, and I appreciate that.
Well, good. I'm glad you could get down the road of yesteryear and be glad that you don't have to crawl up in that engine yourself now. So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, and we'll see you again next week. We really appreciate you coming by, and thanks to Kalen for his work in putting all this together. And
oh yeah, if it wasn't for him, that wouldn't be near as shiny as it is. So that I'm thankful to him too that he can do this for us. But yeah, it's been great, and we'll see you next week.
all right,
All
thanks.
right,
Bye,
bye
everyone.
everybody.